Guys, gals, non-binary pals, we have another Sega Saturn list today with examples of really unique or original Sega Saturn games. For whatever reason, it could be the gameplay or the presentation. It's just something that really set the game apart from other games on the Saturn and the PlayStation at the time to offer really unique experiences that you could only find on the Sega Saturn. And remember, my peoples, that this list is my list. Your list is different. So give some suggestions below. If you don't agree or something like that, it's okay to not agree. It's okay to have different opinions. And make sure to check out the shop if you haven't before. Shop.enemyzero.com. And check out the exclusive Sega Saturn GOAT shirt. But anyways, the Sega Saturn was a trailblazing system, and it definitely had some trailblazing games on it. Many of which are still stuck on the Saturn. The games in this episode had super unique or original gameplay or presentations, could be a combination of the two, that really stuck with me even after all these years. So let's start looking at the games and relive our Sega heritage. And the first pretty unique game I want to look at today, I actually imported back in the day. I was a super big fighting game fan. 2D fighters, obviously the Capcom games are simply marvelous on the Sega Saturn. But there's some other gems in there, including our first game, Astra Superstars. Was released in 1998. It's a 2D versus fighting game, developed and published by Sunsoft, and it was an import title that never left Japan. And it did originally come out as an arcade game, and what sets Astra Superstars apart a little bit from other 2D fighters is it's flight based, meaning your characters are always flying, so you could actually move up and down on the screen. So it's a 2D fighter, but it's not just a 2D plane. You could actually move up and down to dodge attack. It was definitely a pretty cool gameplay mechanic that I had never seen before at the time. And it definitely led to super unique gameplay, really fast paced, really fun. Each button does a different move, and you have super moves and all that sort of stuff. There's even a conversation system in the game where, depending on what you choose at the end of the battle, which, you know, how your conversations go with the opponents, you build up like good or like evil points, and it actually changes the last boss that you get to. But most of the uniqueness of the game is just the fighting and the flight fighting. The flighting?
What?
So it's a super cool 2D fighter. It's a super unique 2D fighter. The graphics are great. Sound effects are pretty good. Music is pretty good. The character names are awesome. There's such classics as Lettuce, Coop, Foolie. The next game that I think is super unique is a lot about the presentation. The gameplay too, but there is other games that play like it, like Space Harrier and stuff like that. But it is called Night Striker S. It's super unique. It's like a racing shooting game in the vein of, you know, Space Harrier or Afterburner or something like that. But it's super unique. It's got that 80s retro wave sort of vibe to it. The music is that 80s, you know, synth music. It all fits together so well. And the gameplay is pretty unique. You actually drive a car. So you can drive on the ground, but you can also fly in the air. Your car can fly. And it can also... It's a boat, too. It could go on the water. The original Night Striker was released in 1989, and the Saturn version was called Night Striker S. But it did come out for other systems, too. It came out, you know, for the PlayStation, Mega CD. It was an arcade game, too, but only in Japan. And it's another title that never came to America. So like I said in other videos, if you're not ready to play Saturn imports, you're gonna miss out on a lot of the goodness on the Saturn. So the game has got, you know, the typical fast zooming sprites in it, and it looks pretty good. It doesn't look like, it's not the best graphics or anything like that, but it definitely plays exactly like you'd think a game like this plays. You can, you know, fly up and down on the screen, shoot things, dodge bullets. One of the very unique things about it is in between levels, you actually get to choose your path, which again, I think is super unique for a game like this. You can choose, you know, one of two paths, whether you go right or left. So you can sort of choose your own adventure in the game, almost like Guardian Heroes. The bosses are typically the same at each intersection, I guess you could say, despite the level. But what the game lacks in sort of graphic fidelity and all that, it makes up for in fun. It's definitely a very fun game, definitely very unique due to the gameplay and the presentation. Your flying car thing. It almost feels like a combination of Space Harrier and Outrun. Like if Space Harrier and Outrun had a baby, it would be Night Striker-esque. Alright, next game that's super unique, I had to put it on another list eventually. I did talk about this title a little bit during my Saturn collection video, which hopefully you've seen. If you're one of the new subscribers, go watch my old video. Please, dear God, please. But this game is the reason that I am named enemyzero. The channel's named enemyzero. I own enemyzero.com. Like, my internet moniker was based on this game, so obviously it's enemyzero. Which is a horror-themed video game. It's a full-motion video game with a little bit of adventuring too. It's a horror-themed. It was released in 1996, and it was developed by Warp and directed by Kenji Ino, who's kind of famous for some of his other games. enemyzero D2 for the Dreamcast, and he was a musician too, so he did a lot of game music. And sadly, he actually passed away in 2013. But I was a pretty big fan of his games back in the day because they were super unique, including enemyzero. The game only came out on Sega Saturn and did come out in the US. I have the US version. And like I said, it's a puzzle-driven FMV game, full-motion video game, but it's got first-person shooter sections. Sort of, but they're done super unique. Like, there's been other games like this before, but, you know, the unique qualities of this game are good and bad, meaning the game is frustratingly hard intentionally. A lot of the gameplay mechanics and stuff are, you'll pull your hair out, but that's sort of the purpose of the game, is to help build that anxiety as you play it. And it works out perfectly because, you know, as you go to the rooms, you get full motion videos, and then you can go out in the hall and explore, and you do get a gun eventually to kill these enemies. But the super unique thing about the enemies is they're completely invisible. Completely invisible. You cannot see them. So you have a sound recorder with you. I think it's called the VPS or something like that. And what it does, it's like that motion tracker in the Alien movies, right? Like, it'll beep if something's near you. There won't be a visual aid, but it'll be an auditory aid. And you need to decipher the beeps to know where the enemy is around you. So if it's beeping quick and it's at a certain tone, it could be right in front of you. If it's beeping very slowly on like a slightly lower tone, it could be far away on the side of you. You literally cannot see them. And to add to the frustration or uniqueness, as this list is, the gun, you can't just shoot your gun. It's not a first-person shooter. You actually have to hold the button down to charge your gun and then release it to shoot it at its peak of power. And so if you can't understand that, you have invisible enemies that you have to track just by auditory blips, beep, beep, beeps, You have a gun that you have to time perfectly when the enemy's right in front of you, not to the side of you. You can't shoot to the side. You can only shoot them if they're right freaking in your face, about to eat your skull. And so yes, it's frustrating. Yes, it's completely unforgiving. But that's what makes it completely unique. It's a completely unique experience. I never played a game quite like this back when it was out. And that's why it's on this super unique list. I would highly suggest checking it out if you like, frustrating games with good FMV, good cinemas, good atmosphere. It's a very, very good, underappreciated, unique game for sure. But it's definitely not for everybody. Alright, the next super unique game is another Japanese game. Yes, Japanese. It did come out on other systems, arcade, Dreamcast, Neo Geo CD, but on the Saturn, it never came to America. And it's super unique. I love shooters, even though I'm not very good at them. And it's a super unique take on a shooter. It's like a two-person versus shooter called Twinkle Star Sprites. It was released in 1996 by SNK, the Neo Geo people, and developed by ADK. There's a goofy sort of storyline in the game, but basically, it's a shooter. You have half the screen, you're shooting things, not hitting things, but depending on, how good you do, you can actually send like puzzle fighter style things over to the other person's screen to try to defeat them. So you're not really defeating the enemies. You're not flying forward and defeating a boss. You're trying to defeat the person flying beside you. Depending on how good you do, you can sort of reverse attacks and send them back, reflect attacks. You can summon boss attacks. There's a power meter that builds up and you can release charge shots even. And it's super unique to combine sort of like a versus game with a shooter. And that's why it works. It's fun. It's a very, very unique concept, and I definitely dig it. I swear there's some US titles on this list, but the next title, again, going back to Japan. Stayed in Japan, never came to America. It's super expensive. This is one of the first ever sort of import Saturn collector's items that I ever knew of back in the day. I did have a physical copy of it at one time, back in the day. Don't anymore. But it's called, I'm going to do the English name first. It's called Psychic Killer Taromaru, or its original Japanese name, which I'm going to butcher, Shinrei Jisatsushi Teomaru. Say that 3 times fast. It's a side-scrolling action game developed by Time Warner Interactive for the Sega Saturn. Like I said, it never came to America. Japan only. Super expensive nowadays. I wouldn't even say the game is that good. I definitely don't think it's worth the price tag, but it is super unique. There is no other games that I've played that played like it at the time. None. Zeros. Nothing on the PlayStation like it or nothing. So it's a 2D side-scrolling game where you control your character, but he actually has a targeting reticule sort of in front of him. So you actually don't use the character to hit the enemies, because the targeting reticule actually auto-targets around the screen as you move. You just have to generally sort of point it in the right direction. And then you can shoot, energy, lightning bolts, charge-up shots that can hit multiple enemies. It's a very, very unique premise. It takes a little while to get used to because, it's so unique, your brain doesn't work like that. It's hard to understand, this targeting reticule is what you're gonna hit rather than, enemies in front of you. You can actually control some of the enemies that'll join you and fight with you on the battle, which you should definitely do because the game is definitely hard. And this game was one of the first examples of sort of 2D sprites over 3D backgrounds. The 3D backgrounds are actually really, really, really good. The graphics in this game are honestly really good. And some of the bosses are crazy cool, crazy cool. You can play the game 2-player cooperative, which gets kind of crazy. So the game almost plays like a, Castlevania or like a Shinobi type game. It definitely has that style to it. But with the control scheme and with the, the targeting reticule, how it works, you could target bosses that are way far in the background. So there's definitely some really cool gameplay elements with the targeting reticule system that they made. And it's definitely so unique that it takes a little while to get used to for sure, but it's definitely a fun game. It's super unique. Nothing else plays like it. I would definitely give it a shot if you can, and I praise it for being one of the unique Sega Saturn only gameplay experiences you can't get anywhere else. Alright, next game is a game I haven't talked about on the channel before. I talked about the sort of side story during the Christmas video, which I hope you watched. Probably not, because it's only got like 30 views, but it is Nights into Dreams. So Nights into Dreams, what can I say about Nights into Dreams that hasn't been said before? It is one of the pinnacle Saturn Sega franchises. It was made by Sonic Team, it was released in 1996, and to this date, there's still nothing else like the original Nights into Dreams gameplay-wise. It's such a unique concept, still to this day. They did release a, Wii one eventually. And Sega knew what they had when Nights came out. It actually came with the analog pad, their big, 3D analog pad for the Sega Saturn to, compete with the PlayStation. And the game was definitely built for the pad, because you basically fly. You fly through the air. And just the way the controls works, it's side-scrolling. It's not like a flight sim where you're flying towards the screen, you're like flying on the side. If you get really good at Nights and you have the levels memorized and everything, you can like tear through the levels, and it almost looks like a dance, like a ballerina in, Black Swan is taking place in the sky. The precision and just the sense of flight that it gave you was unmatched at the time, absolutely unmatched. It was so good, so fun. It's a Yuji Naka game, and it was eventually ported to other things: PlayStation 2, Windows, Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, I believe it had digital versions on all those. It's basically a score attack game. You go into a level, you have to go around the level, collect orbs to, break these cages, which require, a minimum number of orbs, 20 orbs. And so each level has 4 sort of sub-levels in it, and then there's a boss at the end. And you get graded in between each level too. And the graphics were so good. There's a lot of pop-up, but it's actually a fully realized world, the levels that you're going through, which some people might not realize. Because if you do run out of time, you turn into a human and you fall to the ground and you have to walk. You have to follow the arrow to walk to, where you need to go to blue orbs or, wherever it's leading you. And it's a completely full 3D, worldscape at the bottom that you're flying around. And so the different paths and everything as you're flying through, all 4 sections of the level are super creative. The graphics are super colorful. And, the combination of the presentation and the super unique gameplay, this was a super unique Sega Saturn game. You couldn't get any experience like this anywhere else. It's so good. Nights into Dreams is one of those, tentpole Sega Saturn must-have games that if you've never played it before, if you're getting into the system now, it's definitely one of those big titles that made me fall in love with the Saturn, back in my teenage years when I first got it. The flying is so fun in the game, especially with the 3D controller. Like, it's fun just flying around, like not even worrying about the score or anything like that. Just the gameplay is so fluid, and it feels so good the way they did the flight. So unique, so good. Nights into Dreams. The next game I think is a pretty unique thing, is another Japanese game. It did come out much, much later on the PSP, and there was a PlayStation 4 version in Japan. This is all Japan. It never came to America. It's called Princess Crown. It was developed and published by Atlas in collaboration with Sega in 1997. And if you've played the game before, you might recognize some of the graphic style in the game, because this is one of the early games of an ex-Capcom employee, George Kamatani, who actually, after this game came out, he was one of the founders of Vanillaware, yes. So if you played any of more modern Vanillaware games, you can definitely tell in the graphic style of this game, this is where Vanillaware started to sort of become Vanillaware, if that makes sense. So the graphics are very good in this game, but we're not talking about the graphics necessarily. Princess Crown, what it is, it's like a side-scrolling beat-em-up RPG. And it's super unique in the sort of the gameplay setting for something like that, because you actually, you get experience, you level up, there's items to use and stuff, but it's like a 2D, almost fighting game. It's not a turn-based RPG. You actually, it's got, the huge sprites on the screen. When you travel from place to place, you will run into enemies, but you actually have to fight them, sort of like you have, fighting game moves and stuff like that. It's not a turn-based RPG, but you get, the experience. Enemies drop, coins and items to bring to the towns. There's towns where you can talk to people and, figure out where you're going, buy stuff in the store and stuff like that. So it's a super unique sort of RPG fighting game, 2D side-scroller, like hybrid. There's a attack button, there's a jumping and dodging button. So you actually jump and dodge in real time, but it's definitely not what you would expect from a side-scrolling or, role-playing game. You can get different equipment, you could buy different equipment, armors, weapons, accessories. And it was kind of a failure at launch, believe it or not. But, after the game, like I said, Vanillaware was founded right after this. And the next game they did was Odin Sphere. And then Muramasa the Demon Blade, which were sort of spiritual successors to Princess Crown. So this is a super unique side-scrolling sort of action RPG. And it really did kickstart Vanillaware as a modern company. It's very unique, it's a little slow, it's a little sluggish, and there's definitely super huge difficulty spikes in it. But it's a very unique game. If you like side-scrolling beat-em-ups, you might want to give it a try. Another super unique game I want to talk about here is a game I've actually talked negatively about before. It was my number one pick for my overrated Saturn games video, and I do stand by it. I don't think it's a bad game necessarily. I think it was too ahead of its time. It's Burning Rangers, which was released in 1998. It was developed by Sonic Team again, obviously published by Sega. Yuji Naka.
Press the Z button for navigation. I'll guide you. Chris! Keep moving forward. The fire is spreading faster than I thought.
And I think a lot of people know the story of this game. It's a super expensive, Saturn game. It was one of the last titles that was ever released in America. It came out in Japan first, and it came out in Europe too. And even though I think it was too ahead of its time and it didn't translate very well to a fun gameplay experience, it was super unique. Again, there's nothing else like it as a time. It's completely third-person sort of, behind-the-back shooting game where you play as a firefighter and you extinguish, fires by shooting them, which makes sense, okay? And the purpose of the game is to go through the levels and rescue the people in it, put out fires and stuff like that. The gameplay is definitely super, super unique. You have a jetpack on your suit, and the level design in the game, to give it its credit, are very good, and they're not just horizontally based, they're very vertical too. So there's a lot of, different crazy sort of jumping in the game and verticality in the levels that's pretty unique to a full 3D game at the time. Expansive environments like Burning Rangers and stuff technically are pretty impressive, especially with the lighting effects and stuff. And your character's not just limited to, shooting. They can do backflips, they can do rolls, they can swim, dive underwater. There's a lot of different unique mechanics to the gameplay that again make it an original experience, an experience you can't really get anywhere else, especially at the time. There was no in-game map in the game, so you had a narrator that would sort of tell you, hey, go left, go right, where all the stuff is. And definitely I still stand by the fact that I wish they maybe delayed this and released it, polished it a little bit more and released it for the Dreamcast, because there are a lot of bugs, there are a lot of graphical defects in the game and stuff too. But we're talking about unique gameplay experiences here. There's no other firefighter game out there where you shoot the fire and can double jump through the air and do backflips and, do all these crazy moves and climb up these giant towers and everything that you can do in the game. So that's why it's on this list. It is a super unique gameplay experience. I would definitely recommend it if that sounds like fun to you.
The doc just went in there.
Okay, leave him to me. Don't worry.
Confirming the transport coordinates. Begin transport. Transport confirmed. Tillis.
And the next couple games I have talked about briefly before, but they were super unique gameplay experiences at the time. With the first ones being a unique working design localized game called Dragon Force, which was a real-time strategy role-playing game developed and published by Sega. It was published by Working Designs in America. I'm a big Working Designs fan from back in the day, and a lot of the games Working Designs brought to America were games that necessarily would not have ever come to America. So I know lots of people dig them for some of their translations. Maybe they don't agree with some of the humor in them or whatever. I would much rather have the game with a little quirky humor in it than not have the game at all. Hello? And that's what Dragon Force was to me. Again, it was a super, super unique strategy game where you could have armies of 102 actually, if you count the generals. 100 troops on the screen at one time fighting it out in the middle of this giant arena. And there was obviously other strategy games at the time, but most of the other strategy games were, take your turn, one unit hits one unit or something like that, like Shining Force or, Final Fantasy Tactics, something like that. This was super unique in its premise where you could each general could build up an army of 50 troops on their side, and there was a bunch of different troops to choose from. And the troops were better against some other enemies, sort of like rock, paper, scissors, right? Like, the dragons were good against this, but not good against that. Mages are good against this, but not against that. So it was like a sort of chess game, matching up, troops that were good against the people that were coming, to your castles to attack you. And the game is definitely a combination of different genres too. It's not just a strategy game like that. There's a lot of, war simulation elements to it, but there's a big storyline in it. There's really, really cool anime cinemas. There's RPG elements. You could actually get equipment and equip your general with different equipment. You can recruit different people from your army. When you defeat an enemy, you get a chance to recruit them sort of into, your army when you take over a castle or something like that. There's 8 different rulers to choose from, and each ruler starts out a different place on the map, starts out with different soldiers, starts out with different generals. And while you're playing, each day while you're playing, when the map is open, it's all real time too. You can see the troops, you can see other kingdoms attacking, other kingdoms. So you can plan out your defenses, whether you're going to be aggressive or defensive. And another unique thing too is the battles, you have multiple generals. So when you get into a battle, you can actually choose which general. So you see the troops that your enemy is sending out, and then you can choose your general to try to choose, the general that has troops that are, essentially super effective against their troops or something like that. And then even during the battle, the generals who are participating in the battle have, special attacks. They can have 3 levels of special attacks. They can give a bunch of commands to the troops. And the game is just so much fun. I had fun. I think I beat it with every general back in the day. I wish I still had my save file. But the save file goblins came and ate them up. But it's a very unique combination of, war simulation, RPG, strategy. It's definitely an amalgamation of a ton of different things. And it's super unique, super fun. There was a Dragon Force 2 that never came to America. There is a fan-translated version you can download nowadays. I have not played it. Maybe I'll play it for the channel someday. But definitely, Dragon Force gets a thumbs up for being a freaking awesome game, but also one of the most unique experiences that you can't get on another system. There's nothing like this on the PlayStation at the time. Nothing. Alright, the next game I definitely have talked about before, multiple times. I gotta talk about it again, because it was one of the original 3D, I'm gonna quote, okay, air quotes right here, Metroidvanias. Obviously, I'm talking about Power Slave. So it's a first-person shooter, like a lot of other first-person shooters. I know I've talked about the graphics and everything before, how amazing the graphics are, the lighting effects and everything, but we're talking about gameplay here. So what Power Slave did a little bit different than other first-person shooters at the time was there's different powers you can get in the game, different seals, and they will let you unlock doors that you passed previously. So that's why I say Metroidvania, because obviously this was light years before, Metroid Prime or something like that, a 3D first-person Metroidvania. Obviously there was Metroids before this. But Power Slave, made by Lobotomy Software and published by Playmates Interactive, was such a unique take on the genre at the time. It was called Exhumed in Europe, and it did also come out on the PlayStation also. However, the inferior version. It's got a very unique setting. It's ancient Egyptian, which is, a first-person setting that you haven't seen very much of, especially for when this released back in the day. Obviously, there's more stuff nowadays. But back in the day, it was very unique to have, Egyptian set of enemies and stuff like that. It had an overworld map in it, which is how you go back to previous areas. Because, as you go, like I said, you get, these different abilities and stuff like that to jump higher, to levitate, breathe underwater, stuff like that. Then you can go back to previous levels and go to areas that you haven't been yet to unlock more stuff, to find more things and have, just have a ball. And again, that was a super unique selling point. Not going to level 1, 2, 3, 4 and beating the game. You can go wherever you want. It's completely, it's semi non-linear. Get things, go back to previous levels, explore, get new items, get new, guns, abilities, go forward, go backwards, explore. There was an amazing sense of exploration in the game. It's definitely one of my favorite first-person shooters on the Sega Saturn. Deserves every accolade that it gets. And it's a very unique experience. Alright, and the last super unique game on the Sega Saturn that you could not play anywhere else. Not that you'd maybe want to after you actually play the game, but it's such a unique, bizarre experience, you can't get it out of your mind after you play it. It's called Mr. Bones.
Will descend upon the earth. Then there will be no more conflict, no more struggle between good and evil. There will only be evil. The world will be pure.
Developed by Zano and published by Sega, released in 1996. It was actually, they had a lot of marketing behind this game. And I'm telling you, it's on this list because it's so unique. It's so baffling unique. However, I wouldn't say honestly, that it's a very good game. It's super unique. It's got a ton of different levels, and each level is almost a different genre of game, which is sort of its big selling point. However, I would say most of the games are not very fun. If you actually play the game, it's kind of hard to have fun with the game, but it's so bizarre. It's so unique. You basically take the role of a skeleton that was brought back to life by some guy, bring in a bunch of skeletons back to life to take over the world or something like that. And I mean, it's so hard to describe the gameplay of this game because literally every level is a different type of game. There's some levels where you're getting flown through the air, you're hanging on, something is carrying you through the air and you're smashing through stained glass windows. And there's a level where, it's like a breakout style game or something like that. There's a level where you're just being chased by a bunch of skeletons across the room. There's levels where you're playing musical instruments. You can play guitar in the game. You can play drums in the game. It is a very musically themed game. And the games aren't that complicated sort of control-wise. They're very sort of rudimentary, very basic, one button press sort of games. And definitely, I think part of the uniqueness of the game is not knowing what's going to happen. Like, as you play the game and you get to the next level, you have no idea what to expect. Zero. If you've never played the game before, you cannot anticipate 1 single second of the game's cinemas or its level design. Not one single one. It's so unique in its creativity and its just overall weirdness that it definitely has to come up in a list like this. Maybe a cool gameplay mechanic. As you go through the levels, when you get hit, you actually lose pieces of your body. And it's very loosely sort of physics based. Like if you lose a leg, then you hop on the ground. So it does slow you down a little bit. It changes the gameplay a little bit. So there was definitely some thought and care, made to the game with all the different levels and all the different, genres, the different things going on with Mr. Bones himself. But like I said, I personally don't find the game very fun. However, it's super unique. It's definitely worth experiencing. Some of the levels are frustratingly hard, impossible to beat. But I mean, if you're looking for something unique, you're looking for something weird that you can't get on any other platform, stuck on the Saturn, then Mr. Bones, that's your game. So what'd you think of the list? You got any others to add to the list that you would recommend I play? Let me know below. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, thanks for tuning in for another video, and I will check you later. Don't forget to check out the store.